Welcome, everybody. My name is Suresh Srinivasan. I'm the coordinator for the Beginner Special Interest Group of the Minnesota Astronomical Society. I've been in this role 10 years now. I think it was 2016 that I started in this role. And I believe this is the third time that I've done this presentation. The last time I think was in 2019, so it's been a while. A little bit about me. I've been an amateur astronomer for about 41 years now. I started when I was in high school outside Chicago. And it just happened to coincide about 6 months before Halley's Comet showed up. So that was really a great time to be joining astronomy, if you remember that far back. So I've been a visual observer for about 35 of those years, and the last several I've been predominantly an imager, but I still enjoy visual. I still have visual telescopes. I still take one with me when I go on trips. So I do a little bit of imaging and visual. Let's see. A couple of housekeeping notes. Phil is helping me moderate or being the moderator for this. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If you click on if you put your mouse on the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat button in the middle. Click on that, and then put your question in there. And then every few minutes or so, when I pause, Phil's going to ask the question. That'll just keep the presentation moving. Also, this presentation is being recorded, and it'll be posted on our MAS YouTube channel in a few days. And if you ever want to see old recordings from BSIG meetings, they're all on there. We must have at least, I don't know, at least 20 of them on there by now. Plus all the MAS general meetings are also on there. So with that, I'm going to start all about telescopes. So my first telescope was a little Jason refractor. It was a 60 millimeter f15 that I got in January of 1985. Here it is in my old bedroom. I have it here with me in my current home now in the basement. And I treated this thing like it was the Palomar 200 inch. Like I went for everything and didn't necessarily get them, but I tried. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about that time is there are a lot of junk telescopes on the market. A lot of them came out for Halley's Comet, but in general, there were several or many junk telescopes that you could get. I call them junk, and I'll tell you why in a second. Some of them were from Tasco or Bushnell, a few other brands, even some name brands like Meade and Celestron came out with telescopes that were just terrible telescopes. And back then, there was a term called the astronomy killer telescope. I don't know if people remember that term, but the five signs of the astronomy killer. Terrible image quality due to substandard optics was the primary one. They typically came with a few eyepieces, but they were so narrow and cheap that you could barely look through them, and the images weren't very good. The mount being very flimsy, it was hard to set up, tough to move, tough to maneuver around the sky. Focus knobs that were small, hard to turn, so it was really hard to focus. And then just a terrible finder scope that was essentially useless. So I would actually categorize my Jason in that category, but for some reason that didn't happen to me. It went the other way. I just got even more interested in telescopes. Um, I've seen two kinds of people get into astronomy from the beginner side. The people that don't spend enough up front and get a telescope that isn't very good, and then they have a bad experience, and then they just throw it in the closet and they never look through it again. And then there's other times I've seen that people that spend too much on their first telescope. I call them the too much scopers. And a lot of times these are telescopes they spend thousands of dollars on. They're very bulky. They're hard to move. A lot of them came with electronics that they can't figure out. They have a big learning curve, and they have to do this while it's in the dark. So it's not very easy or fun. And so I've seen both sides of it. People try it, they don't like it, and it's either too complicated or not good enough, and they leave. So I've always had this phrase that astronomy really isn't about what you have; it's what you enjoy doing. So if you're into planetary visual, looking at planets, get a telescope that's good at that. If you're into photography or imaging, get a telescope that's good at that. If you want an all-around telescope, we'll talk about that, like a Schmidt-Cassegrain. Go that route. Don't get something that is going to underwhelm you, and then it makes you leave the hobby. Um, the good news on this is in the past, say, 35 years, since the early 90s, telescope technology has come a really long way. So it's harder to get a true junk telescope these days, a true astronomy killer. Many telescopes now have pretty good optics. The mount technology's gotten better. There's go-to now that you can get that makes things a lot easier in terms of finding things in the sky, etc. So, what do you want to see and do? So, what kind of telescope should I buy for myself or maybe for my child? So, as I mentioned, are you interested in planets? If so, I'd probably steer you towards a refractor on a what's called a German equatorial mount, a gem. Maybe you can get a Newtonian or a Maksutov instead. Those are also really good for planets. Are you interested in viewing comets and deep sky objects? Then I'd probably point you to a Schmidt-Cassegrain or a larger Newtonian or a Dobsonian. That's probably the right choice for you. Large binoculars are also a consideration for comets or deep sky objects. Typically, most binoculars you see for sale are say 50 millimeter and below. For astronomy, you 50 millimeter is really the floor. You don't want to get anything really smaller than that because there aren't that many objects that you can see with them. Typically in astronomy, with respect to binoculars, you see 70, 80, 100 millimeter binoculars being used. If you're planning to take pictures, now this talk is primarily about visual observing, but we'll touch upon imaging at points. So if you're interested in taking pictures, you'll need a very sturdy mount with a tracking motor. And typically, people that image use refractors or what's called Ritchie-Curtaians or Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes, the SETs. So once I get past these preliminary questions, I typically narrow down further. Where do you live? Do you live in the city? Are you going to have to, put this in a car every time you want to use it? If so, that's going to be a factor on which telescope you get because you don't want to get something that's too big and too heavy. And obviously, how much are you looking to spend? More is better to a certain point, but I will tell you, for a beginner, you could probably get away with spending somewhere between $500 and $1,500 to start to get a reasonable telescope. The single most important thing that a telescope does is it collects light. So the larger the telescope, the more light it collects, and therefore the brighter the image. The larger the aperture, the more resolution you get, so the sharper the image. So there's a couple of considerations. And then finally, as we'll see, the quality of the image brightness, portability, weight, tracking, go-to capability, the ability to take photos, the learning curve, etc. These are all the big considerations before you buy or even build your first telescope. Now, as I'm getting started here, I will say that there's a lot of words on the upcoming slides. This is by design because this is more of a guide, this deck, than it is a presentation deck. So I will post this on the MAS forum afterwards, but don't get nervous about the amount of words. I'll try to summarize it for you on each slide. Okay, let's talk about refractors. There's three main kinds of refractors, and the three types, each type informs on the cost and the sophistication of the refractor. Refractors are very expensive compared to other kinds of telescopes. And the reason for that is it's the design. Making lenses is still not an easy thing to do. And if you get a blemish in the glass, you have to basically throw it out and start all over again. So, because of all that, refractors are the most expensive kind of telescope, inch for inch, that you can find. The most basic refractors use just one standard glass element, as you see here on the right. This first picture, one glass element here. This is a problem because of something called chromatic aberration that we'll talk about later. But what that basically means is if you think of the colors of the rainbow, or maybe if you played with a spectrum as a child, a prism, the colors of the spectrum come to focus at different points. So if you guys remember Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, that's what's represented here. So blue is the shortest of those wavelengths. Actually, it's violet, but for our purposes, blue. Red is the longest, and green, which is what we're most sensitive to, is right in the middle. So what this basically means is each one of these comes from different focus points. So you can never get to a point where everything's in sharp focus. Because of that, these one element refractors aren't very good for planets or for viewing brighter objects because they'll always look fuzzy. They'll always look like they're partly out of focus, and that's a problem. As I mentioned, red light comes to focus at the longest distance. And a lot of the objects that we see, like nebulae and things like that, are red. Green is in the middle, and then, like I said, blue and purple are the shortest. One way to correct for color imbalances is to combine two pieces of glass, like shown in this middle diagram here. These are called doublets or achromatic refractors. As you can see here, what's happened is the blue and the red have somewhat merged into a single focus point. That's what a doublet can do. So green has still got a different focus point, and the other colors of the spectrum probably have a slightly different focus point. But you can see what this is doing. It's making it so that some of the colors are now in line with each other, so you get a sharper image. It's still not perfect, but it's probably, depending on the quality of the refractor, it's probably between 96 and 98% corrected. So a lot of people will get doublets, especially beginners, because they tend to be made cheaper because they're only two elements, and I guess they're a little bit easier to make than triplets. So triplets are the next piece, and these are now you start talking about the higher end kinds of refractors, and these use three pieces of glass: convex. I can't remember what the central one is called, and then concave. Those are the shapes of glass that you generally find in telescopes, and you'll notice here that now all the colors come to focus. See that? And so the ability to get all these lenses perfectly made is very difficult and very expensive. So triplets are quite expensive generally. The best ones use something called ED glass or extra low dispersion glass. As mentioned, there's also the fluorites. Those tend to be doublets. So this is kind of like once you get into this category, you're talking more money. But you see what it does. It corrects for the different focus points with the colors of the spectrum. So let's talk a little bit about cost for these. So you can, and this is off an internet search that I did recently and updated some of the costs from the last time that I did this deck 7 years ago. So a 2-inch refractor in this, let's say 60 to 80 millimeter class, you can find them out there for as cheap as $500. I think Apertura has one for in that price range, but the better ones can go up as high as 1,300. I think I saw one for 1,500. So you can see it's quite a range here, right? A 4-inch refractor, which is really the starting point for a lot of planet imagers or deep sky observers, say planet observers, I should say. Those can anywhere from 900 all the way to 2,600 for the better ones. Now look at the cost: 5-inch telescopes, refractors, 2,000 to 15,000. 6-inch up to 16,000, and the 8-inch ones 19,000. Just try to keep in mind this kind of this price range. Okay, you can see how it just goes up exponentially, right? And that's really because of the difficulty in the manufacturing process and the rarity to see larger refractors. I'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, keep going. I think I skipped a slide. I did skip a slide. Okay, let me back up a second ago to the first refractor slide. So refractors are the first kind of telescope dating back to the early 17th century. So they were invented around the year 1608. And the quick story is there was a man named Hans Lippershey who was an optician living in the Netherlands. And at the time, the Netherlands was fighting a war with Spain. And if you know the Netherlands, they're basically on the water, right? So he was trying to make his mark. He was trying to invent something that would help his king win the war against Spain. But he was having trouble figuring out how to use these optics for that purpose. Then the story goes one day these two teenage girls walked in to his shop and they saw his little table full of lenses and started playing with them and pointing them out the window. And then one girl apparently took two pieces of glass and held them up together. One piece of glass was concave shaped and the other one was convex. And all of a sudden, she noticed that the ships out to sea were bigger. I think they were upside down, but they were larger. And so Hans Lippershey apparently saw this and decided to put them in a tube. And that was literally the first modern telescope. And he tried to patent this design because he wanted to make a lot of money and become famous and help his king. But the Dutch patent office declined his patent, saying it wasn't very useful. So that was a big win for us because since it wasn't patented, that design traveled all across Europe. So quickly it got to Italy, and there was a guy named Galileo Galilei, who you may have heard of. So he made a telescope out of that same design. I think it was roughly a, and Vols, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think it was like a 40 millimeter, his first telescope. So really small, but he used that to find the four Galilean moons. He observed the sun, the moon, the phases of Venus, all sorts of things that were revolutionary at the time, and he did that with a very small refractor. So a little bit about the design of refractors. Basically, they have a lens up front. Light comes in through the front, goes straight through the back where the eyepiece sits. So it's a very simple design. This lens up front is called an objective, and this space here is called the aperture. So on this black telescope up top, this is the aperture essentially. So in this example, this is probably, I'm going to guess, a 60 millimeter refractor. And let's see. The other thing to take note of here is something called focal length. It's where the light from the image comes to focus. And so back here where the eyepiece is essentially. And then a third thing to take note of is something called the focal ratio. And what that is the focal length divided by the aperture. That's essentially what the focal ratio is. And we'll talk about this more, but the longer the focal length, the longer the focal ratio, typically it's better for planets and some of the brighter stars and things like that, but they're not as good for deep sky objects because they tend to dim the image. Shorter telescopes, I'll call them shorter focal ratio telescopes. They call them faster telescopes. These are primarily better for, say, deep sky. They have a wider field of view. The images are brighter. So that's kind of why we talk about these metrics, as it were, focal ratio in particular. So most refractors have focal ratios between f6 and f15. The faster ones towards, say, f8 or f6 are more difficult and costly to produce, so they tend to be more expensive. So you'll see some of the great makes, the name brands, I'll say Astrophysics or Takahashi or APM, Stellar View. Those makers, they will have multiple telescopes in the same aperture range, but at different focal lengths. Excuse me. And the longer focal lengths tend to be cheaper than the faster ones. As mentioned, refractors are often the most expensive type of telescope and have the widest cost range, as we've already seen. Typically, you don't see any refractors on the observing field larger than, say, 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches, because of the cost. And again, down here at the bottom right, I have the chart uh, that shows how the cost, once you get to 4 or 5 inches, the cost gets prohibitive. And plus, it's really heavy. You need a really heavy mount for that. And so there's a lot that goes into getting a larger refractor. But as mentioned, refractors are excellent for planet observing. They don't have a central obstruction in the design, which would be right where my cursor is here. And so what you get out of this is you get really good views of the planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, great views of the moon, the craters. And with proper filters, you get great images of the sun. The only other types of telescopes that could compete with refractors on planets are Maksutov and some reflectors, Newtonians, that have high quality mirrors, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Typically, refractors are set on German equatorial mounts like this one here. These high quality gems, say the ones made by Losmandy or Vixen or Astrophysics, there's a few others. These mounts provide really good stability, really good tracking. They often come with GPS these days. The vibration or the dampening on these mounts is really, really fast and really good. Typically, these mounts are more expensive. To get a good one costs these days at least 2,000, if not more. There's a secondary market that I use a lot to get these used that I'll mention at the end. That is a really good option, especially for beginners that don't want to spend the money. You'll find that many of the finest images of the planets were taken through refractors, as opposed to other kinds. Let's see. However, longer focal length refractors have very narrow fields of view, as I mentioned. So if you're going to do imaging through a refractor, through a long focal length refractor, the exposure times are generally going to be too long for practicality with deep sky objects or comets. you'll need a faster f6 or f8 refractor that has a big, wider field of view, really good color correction, and faster exposure times. But as mentioned, these could be really expensive. One thing I like to do is I like to talk about telescopes in terms of the type of car that I think they are. And for me, refractors are the Mercedes Benzes of telescopes because inch for inch, these are the most expensive, but the quality is really good. And the images are just the contrast on planets is outstanding. Color is really good. What I call texture, which is like lateral color spread across the field, is excellent in refractors compared to other kinds of telescopes. So the pros of refractors is that there's no central obstruction. They give you the highest quality images inch for inch. They're easy to clean and maintain the objective lens. They hardly ever need optical alignment or collimation, if ever. I don't think I've ever collimated any of my refractors. And up to about 5 inches, they're fairly easily transportable. I'll say it's probably better to say 4 inches. Um, but you'll see a lot of these on the observing field. Sometimes people either imaging with them or looking at planets, etc. The cons for refractors is they're definitely the most expensive type of telescope inch per inch of aperture. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very rare to see them larger than 5 inch. Our club actually has a 10-inch refractor and an 8-inch refractor at our observatories, and they're amazing. But for the average person, they're not going to spend $10,000 or $20,000 for a telescope, so that usually takes them out of that. Lesser quality refractors suffer from chromatic aberration, as we've already discussed, which can greatly diminish the image quality. To mitigate this, you must get a more expensive achromat or apachromat, which are the 2 and 3 lens configurations we talked about earlier. The other thing too is refractors can be prone to fog up on nights with high dew, high moisture content. So typically people bring either portable hair dryers, or I call them dew guns, or they have dew straps that go around the front of the aperture and keep them warm to keep the moisture off. So some of the makers of refractors, good quality refractors, I'll say Celestron, William Optics. Then there's a new company called Ascar, it's another Chinese company, but the reputation's pretty good. Explore Scientific, Apertura, which is the store brand for High Point Scientific, Sharpstar, which is another Chinese brand, and then Mead and Orion. Unfortunately, those companies went out of business. Was it last year or the year before? But you can still get their equipment. It's actually there's still new equipment from them being sold, but on the secondary market, you see a lot of Orion and Mead telescopes available. If you do want to get a higher quality one, the name brands are Astrophysics, APM, which is a European design or European company based on Russian optics and primarily. Stellar View is a good one. Vixen Borg out of Japan. Teleview, which is definitely a good company, and Takahashi. I think Takahashi and Astrophysics probably have the best names, the best name brands. Teleview is probably third on this list, and then Stellar View and the rest. Any questions so far?
Got one
Phil?
question. Suggestion to increase your pointer size, mouse pointer size if you can. It's
How
hard to
do
see.
how do I
I don't know.
do that? I don't know how to
Uh,
do. Anybody know how to do that?
Anybody can unmute and chat if they want.
I think
Yeah,
you do it under settings mouse, and then you can choose the size.
I'm under settings.
There's like a laser pointer option if you it should be um, in that menu.
It on let's see. Oh, laser pointer tools. Okay, laser pointer. Is that better?
Yeah, I can see that better.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go with that. Thanks for the tip. Any questions about refractors?
None so far.
Okay, keep going. Is this thing gonna let me? But now I can't toggle. Oh, okay. Here we go. Schmidt Cassegrains. So in the early 1960s, there was an engineer in California named Tom Johnson, and he was trying to find a telescope for his son, a first telescope, and he just didn't like what he was seeing out there. This was a time when telescopes were big and bulky and really heavy, really hard to take anywhere. optics weren't very good typically. So he just wasn't happy with what he was seeing. So he decided to build a telescope on his own that could go anywhere and do anything. And what he came up with was the modern Schmidt-Cassegrain, or SCT. Tom Johnson eventually started Celestron and rolled these telescopes out in the mid 1960s. And they sold like hotcakes, and they blew away the competition. Several competitors end up going out of business because of the Schmidt-Cassegrain. Soon there were competitors such as Criterion and Meade Instruments that also started selling Schmidt-Cassegrains, and as mentioned, they were soon everywhere. So remember we talked about with refractors, there's lenses, right? So let me go back. So this is a lens, the objective lens, as it says here. So Schmidt-Cassegrains have, I probably should have done this after reflectors, but Schmidt-Cassegrains have a combination of lenses and mirrors. So they're called catadioptrics, right here, catadioptric. So they're more complicated design than a typical refractor or reflector. So the design is such: light comes in through the front, hits what's called the corrector plate, which is right here. And you can see it up here in the diagram. You can see the plate sitting right here. It's somewhat curved. It's got a slight curve to it. Light goes through that corrector plate, hits the big mirror in the back, bounces forward again off the mirror, hits the secondary mirror, which is right in here, secondary mirror, and then bounces back through the back here where the eyepiece is here. So there's a hole in the primary mirror, so it comes right through there to that point. So you can see it's kind of a complicated design. So this is basically what they call a folded design. So the advantages to this is that it's a lot more compact than it would be if they didn't have this bouncing through configuration. So the corrector plate serves an important purpose. The primary mirror in a Schmidt-Cassegrain it's what's called a spherical shape. And so one of the problems with the spherical shape is it's something called spherical aberration. And I won't talk too much about that. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's an optical defect that would cause problems for anybody that's trying to view an object through a telescope without a corrector plate that has a spherical design. This front corrector plate partially resolves that issue because it has a curve that basically negates spherical aberration. And then the secondary mirror here, I think, also has a little bit of a correction for that, for spherical aberration. So by the time it gets to the back end here, there's no defect in the image. It's flat. There is no spherical aberration, is what I'm trying to say. So let's see. So the internal design of the what they call the optical tube assembly, which is the telescope itself, so just this part, and this convex secondary mirror, enables a Schmidt-Cassegrain to be very compact. One of the most compact kinds of telescopes, actually, inch for inch. Though the primary mirror on these telescopes is actually really fast. It's remember focal ratio we talked about? This is f2.2 typically in most Schmidt-Cassegrains. But because of this design and trying to limit spherical aberration, by the time it gets to the eyepiece, it's f10, which is quite long. So even though it's got this really compact design, where it comes to focus is as if it was a very long tube telescope. Okay. So, but again, the advantage here is it's really portable, makes it really easy to take it down, set it back up. Many Schmidt-Cassegrains come with this fork-mounted design, as you see here, which are really easy to figure out how to use compared to other designs. And a lot of these come with GPS. Many times these days they come with go-to and tracking. So these telescopes, by and large, can do a little bit of everything. They're not great at anything compared to other designs, but they're really good at everything. So remember I talked about types of cars? I consider Schmidt-Cassegrains to be the Subarus of telescopes because they can do a little bit of everything. So the pros of Schmidt-Cassegrains are they're a jack of all trades. Like I mentioned, they're good at everything, not great at anything. The field of view is very flat. The contrast here is really high. Not quite as high as a good quality refractor, but still pretty high. And the background is very much black. Though the Schmidt-Cassegrains have these spherical primaries, they do not suffer from spherical aberration because the corrector plate mitigates most of that problem. As mentioned, they're light and compact enough to be taken anywhere. Even a small car could take these. And to set them up takes about maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Typically, you'll see Schmidt-Cassegrains on this configuration, a fork mount, or sitting on a German equatorial mount. And these days, almost all of them come with built-in tracking. So unlike the very, very cheap telescopes, these will track the stars and planets and objects across the sky for you. So one thing to consider with Schmidt-Cassegrains is the secondary mirror can become misaligned with the primary mirror. And so oftentimes you're going to have to collimate, which is realigning the secondary with the primary. And it's not hard once you know how to do it, but there is a learning curve with learning how to collimate a Schmidt-Cassegrain. But it's definitely easier to collimate on a Schmidt-Cass versus a Newtonian or Dobsonian telescope. A lot of people use this for imaging, starting out at least. Phil does that on this call. Back in the day when I first got into this, I got a Schmidt-Cassegrain. I use it for piggyback photography. So you stick a camera up on top here. And the purpose for that is the telescope will track the object while your camera takes wide angle pictures of the Milky Way or objects in the sky. So that's an option for you. The cons with it, this design is that because of the largest central obstruction here, typically this is 34% of the total aperture. It's quite large. And the imperfect matching of the secondary and primary mirrors at the factory where they're made. A lot of times the optical quality can't match really good reflectors or most refractors. So they're pretty good, but not great optically, is what I'm trying to say. And because they're a native f10 focal ratio, they have a narrower field of view than another telescope, say, of the same aperture, but has a shorter focal length. So just to give you an idea here, where these Schmidt-Cassegrains are f10, let's say if it was f5, it would have twice the field of view. And the image would be, I think it's either 2 or 4, I think it's 2 times brighter than an f10. So that's what that means. Schmidt-Cassegrains are cost competitive compared to other kinds of telescopes, but only up to about 8 inches or so, maybe 10. After that, the cost and weight become too prohibitive. You very rarely see Schmidt-Cassegrains out in the observing field larger than 8 inches. There are many 11-inch and 14-inch versions out there, but they're typically used in observatories or for imaging planets and things like that. And you can see the costs here and how you can get a 4-inch one. I saw one, I think it's a high point for $750. Now, mind you, the high range here includes packages, not just the telescope itself, the OTA. But a 4 to 6-inch telescope can be had for between $750 and $1,850 new. And then the 8 inches start around $1,400 and the full package is up to $4,300. And a 9 1/4 starts at about $2,000 and it goes up to about $7,200. But then you'll see once you get past that how the cost starts going up and up and up, right? So that's why you don't really see many greater than, say, 8 inches or so on a typical observing field. Now, Celestron is really the only one that still makes Schmidt-Cassegrains out on the market. As mentioned, Meade closed down shop along with Orion, I'll say about 18 months ago, I think. But you can still get Meade Schmidt-Cassegrains either. I think you still get a few maybe new ones as companies or businesses are trying to sell them. But you could definitely get them used. And Meade Schmidt-Cassegrains are also very good. Optically, they're really good. Mechanically, maybe not as good as Celestron, but optically, Meade, I would say, are even better. So, any questions on Schmidt-Cassegrains?
Nothing so far.
Great. Thank you, Phil. I'll keep going. Oh, yeah. I got to do it this way. Maxitovs. Give me 1 second. I'm going to need to check something, make sure I didn't. Yeah, okay. We're good. So I kind of skipped a type here, so I'll do it afterwards. Maxitov Cassegrains are a unique kind of telescope. They're almost a specialty kind of telescope, but I mention them because for beginners, this is something to really consider. Like a Schmidt-Cassegrain, these telescopes are catadioptric, meaning they have both lenses and mirrors. And the design here, as you can see here, is comparable to a Schmidt-Cassegrain, where you have a corrector plate, like in the Schmidt-Cassegrain. So light comes in like this. Did I lose my laser? I lost my laser. There. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Excellent. So light comes in like this, goes through the corrector plate, just like on a Schmidt-Cassegrain, hits the primary mirror here, gets reflected back towards the front, hits the corrector plate, and then goes back through the middle of the primary to where the eyepiece is. So very similar in design, at least in the basic design of the Schmidt-Cassegrain. However, the corrector plate is very different. And you can almost see that here. Can you see the curve of it where this is this is a little bit deeper than the edges? I don't know if it really shows up, but when you look at a Maxitoff, you definitely notice the curve of the secondary mirror. Again, this corrector plate eliminates aberrations caused by the spherical primary, just like in the Schmidt-Cassegrain. Let's see. The differences between a Mac and a Schmidt-Cassegrain is, unlike in a Schmidt-Cassegrain, remember we talked about the corrector plate, the Schmidt-Cassegrain was basically flat, right? Went up and down, basically. This one has a definite curve to it. Also, the secondary is a much thicker piece of glass than it is in a Schmidt-Cassegrain. So a Schmidt-Cassegrain is basically just a thin plate. Here it's up to 10% of the aperture. And the corrector plate in a Maxitoff or a Mac is called a meniscus, okay? And due to this highly curved convex secondary mirror, Maxitoff typically have a very long focal length. So remember, Schmidt-Cassegrains are typically about f10. Macs are typically in the f12 to f15 range. So this makes using these telescopes for deep sky objects more difficult because the images are just going to be fainter and your field of view is going to be more narrow than it would be with a faster focal ratio. To keep costs down, many Mac manufacturers create a secondary mirror by simply illuminizing a spot on the secondary, just basically gluing the secondary onto the piece of glass. Essentially, they call it small spotting, and it works fairly well for Maxitoffs under 6 inches of aperture. But once you get past that, the process just isn't as good. So they actually have to make a physical piece of glass secondary, and that adds to the cost. So why do people even consider Maxitoffs? Because remember I said these are really not the best telescopes for deep sky objects. These are really good telescopes for planets and the moon. Really good. They can compete with refractors that cost 3, 4, 5 times more. And it's kind of a hidden secret in astronomy that people that are into telescopes know that Maxitoffs are really good at planets. So if you want to tell us, if you're primarily interested, let's say you live in the city and you don't get out much, so you can't really see faint galaxies and the Milky Way, but you can see the planets. But you don't want to spend the money of a refractor. A Maxitoff is a really good option to consider. And as I say, due to their high performance and the small size, look how small this thing is compared to other designs. These are the Mini Coopers of telescopes. So you get a lot of performance in a really small package, but these are highly specialized. You can't stick a lot of goods in a Mini Cooper, and you can't see a lot of deep sky objects with a Maxitoff. So, so the pros of this design are inch for inch, a Maxitoff will easily surpass a comparable sized Schmidt-Cassegrain on objects such as planets or the moons. And as I mentioned, they can even rival the best apochromatic refractors at a far lower cost. Look at these costs here. If you remember the refractor cost on a 3 or 4 inch telescope was probably in the 2000 range. I found one for $220, a 3-inch one at High Point Scientific, up to $780. There are 5 to 6 inch ones you can get for between $500 and $1,000. And mind you, these typically come in a package like this. So they have tracking, they have go-to capability. It's all built in. It's very rare to see a Maxitoff that isn't part of a package. So a 7-inch one, which I have, costs between $1,600 and $4,500. Okay, so if you want something that has a pretty good aperture and doesn't cost a whole lot, consider this, the 7-inch. Skywatcher sells one, 7-inch, the 180 millimeters, which is essentially 7 inches. The high-end ones, the Questars, these are more expensive. A 3.5-inch Questar costs somewhere between $4,500 and almost $6,000. whereas the very extremely rare 7-inch costs around 10 to 12,000, give or take, kind of in this range. But if you're really into the planets and the moon and even solar, this is a really good option for you if you don't want to spend the money. If you're curious about telescopes, but you're not sure you want to invest the money, this is a good option. Let's see. Pros. I said they can beat a Schmidt-Cassegrain on planets. Like a Schmidt-Cassegrain, they're very compact. I mean, you pick this up with one arm and walk away with it. So up till about a 5-inch one, you can do that roughly. They perform very well, like I said, on planets. I've never collimated my Maxitoffs. I don't even know how to do that. I don't know if Vaults, have you ever collimated a Maxitoff? If you're still on. And these are available in
Never have.
apertures.
I don't even think that there's capability to
I don't
collimate
know.
them.
I found a reading on how to do it. I just have never had the need to do it. Unlike Schmidt-Cassegrains or Newtonians. And as mentioned, they can be available in as small apertures as 3-inch. The cons on these telescopes, again, the long focal length makes them too slow, quote unquote slow on the F ratio for deep sky objects or deep sky photography. Larger versions can be more costly due to the harder to manufacture secondary mirror. So you rarely see these bigger than about 7 inches or 180 millimeter of aperture. And this relegates them to planetary viewing for the most part. Also, like Schmidt-Cassegrains, this piece of glass up front here can fog up really easily at night on the dewy nights. So you need a dew removal system, whether it be a dew strap or a dew shield or something like that. So any questions on Maxitoffs? We good, Phil?
Let's see. There's a comment about yes, you've collimated Max in
Who said that?
Michael Copper.
Michael, you've actually collimated a Maxitoff? Is he there?
Yeah, I have.
I don't even know how to do that. I might ask you someday and how you did that.
Um, it's exactly the same as a. I mean, mine is it's a mead, and it's exactly the same as a reflector. There are 6 screws on the back, 3 larger ones and 3 smaller ones, and you loosen up the. I think it's the larger ones that you loosen, and then you collimate it with the 3 small screws. I generally use Polaris. You're supposed to use something higher than that, but Polaris is good enough.
Great.
And then you tighten the tightening screws, and of course that messes with it a little bit, and then maybe you repeat it once. But it definitely improved my image, and it was definitely off when I went to calibrate it.
Okay. I'll have to take a look at my Max to see if I even have those screws on the back. But thank you, Michael.
Sure, you're welcome.
Any other questions about anything we've talked about so far? Okay.
That's so far. Yep.
Thanks, Phil. All right, now Newtonian reflectors. I should have had these slides before the Schmidt Cassegrain ones, but it's okay. So remember we talked about refracting telescopes were invented right around 1608, 1609. They were the standard telescope for about 160 years. So any telescope in the 17th century was a refractor, even into the 18th century. But remember, we talked about the problem that's inherent in refractors, and that is chromatic aberration. Remember, the different colors of the rainbow come to focus at different points. And back then, it drove astronomers crazy because they couldn't figure out how to resolve this issue. They look at a bright object like, say, Jupiter, and it looked purple to them because of all these colors coming to focus at different points. So the story goes that in 1669, the Black Death was raging through Europe and had gotten to England. And so Isaac Newton, you may have heard of him, he was at Cambridge, and because of this plague, everybody was sent home. So the students were sent home. The professors were basically locked in their homes. They couldn't really go out. So Isaac had time on his hands, which was, for our purposes, a really good thing. And he had been studying this chromatic aberration problem for a few years, and he decided to do something about it. So Isaac Newton came up with what's now called the Newtonian reflector to try to avoid this chromatic aberration problem. And basically, what he came up with, if you look at this picture here, light comes in through the front of the tube. It's like a refractor, hits what's now a concave mirror. Now, remember, there's no lens here like in a refractor. Light goes all the way through, hits this mirror, concave, bounces forward, hits a secondary mirror, which is a flat piece of glass at a 90-degree angle. I'm sorry, 45-degree angle. And then that reflects up to the eyepiece right here. So light comes in, hits the mirror, hits the secondary, and goes up. And you look at it up here. Okay, and so these concave mirrors are called parabolic mirrors, and it has so many advantages. The production of a reflector has so many advantages on a refractor that this became the standard for essentially the next 350 years in astronomy. Parabolic mirrors being much easier to produce. These Newtonians are typically the cheapest kind of telescope, inch for inch, so they're far cheaper to make and manufacture than a refractor, for example. In terms of optical designs, I'll just say this as a disclaimer. I consider Newtonian reflectors to be closed tube telescopes. Closed tube. That differs from something we'll talk about in a few minutes called Dobsonians, which are typically open truss designs. They're the same exact optical design. I just call Newtonians that have these closed tubes, and I call Dobsonians the telescopes that do not, essentially. One of the issues you do have with this design is that with the closed tube is that as you get larger, the tube gets prohibitively heavier. So you typically don't see Newtonian reflectors larger than say 8 to 10 inches because of their heft and their weight. They become more difficult to transport the larger they get as well. And look where the eyepiece is. It's not in the back like it is with a Schmidt-Cassegrain or a refractor. It's up on the side here in the front. So what happens as this telescope gets bigger? This eyepiece angle gets further off the ground, right? So because of that, they're not always the easiest telescope to look through. You frequently need to get a ladder if you have a larger one. So that's one thing to consider with these. But so what are the good and bad of Newtonian reflectors? These are probably the cheapest telescope design, inch for inch, of any design out there. Because a large part of that is because configuring this mirror is pretty easy to do. And so you can get larger telescopes for much less money than you can with a refractor or even a Maxitoff or even a Schmidt-Cassegrain. So remember we talked about chromatic aberration and refractors. Because it's a mirror and not a lens, it doesn't have chromatic aberration. So the color from stars are precise. There's no purple haze around them like you can see in some lesser quality refractors, let's say. So one of the issues is with these designs is collimation. So there are some screws out in front that are on the secondary, and so first you have to align the secondary with the primary, and then you have to align the primary. So it's a two-step design, so two-step process. So collimation can be an issue, but it's the same for any kind of reflector telescope, whether it be a straight tube or a Dobsonian design. Newtonians with high quality mirrors can be really good at planets as well. Typically, they're not as good as refractors or Maxitoffs, but they can be pretty good. The advantage that they have is because they're so cheap to make, you can get a bigger one for less money than you can other designs. And because you can get a big mirror, you have an advantage with respect to resolution. And so a lot of let's say advanced visual observers will observe planets with Newtonian reflectors in lieu of refractors. So another advantage to Newtonians is that they provide really nice wide fields of view for deep sky objects and comets. So remember we talked about Schmidt-Cassegrain to be an F10, or a lot of refractors being longer, say either F8 to F15, for example. A lot of reflectors you can get in the F5, F6. There's some imaging astrographs that go as fast as f3.9. And so what this gives you is a really wide field of view, and which is really nice for deep sky objects and comets. So, so that's all the good stuff about Newtonians. What are some bad things about them? Well, remember we talked about the parabolic mirrors. They don't have chromatic aberration like refractors, but they have their own problems. Primarily amongst them is they have coma, which is I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But basically, that precludes an object being on the side of the field being in the same sharp focus as if it was in the center of the field. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. Coma can be mitigated by using some corrective optics. Primarily, the TeleVue Paracore is what I use to fix it. There's other ones out there now, or by using shorter focal length eyepieces. So they don't those shorter length eyepieces don't use the outer part of the mirror, so they don't have this problem. But remember, for straight tube Newtonians, the larger it gets, the more cumbersome they are. So it's pretty rare to see them larger than, say, 10 inches because of weight and portability. And mirror quality can vary, though I will say since the 90s, it's pretty hard to get a terrible reflector mirror, at least compared to what it was before that. The manufacturing process have improved to the point where if you buy a commercial mirror, it's probably going to be good, pretty good at this stage. And then you can, if you have a large secondary mirror, which is what a lot of people that view deep sky objects will have to collect more of that light, to capture that light, you can get the same issues that you have as a Schmidt-Cassegrain we talked about, where the images look a little bit blurry, a little bit fuzzy, and not as sharp as with a refractor or a Maxutov or even a Schmidt-Cassegrain. So one problem that I've seen beginners have with this design is solid tube Newtonians can be hard to mount on a German equatorial mount. And then if you put them on a German equatorial mount, like this one, for example, you'd have to learn the motions, what they call right ascension and declination. They're not intuitive, so there's a learning curve with these. And then celestial images are upside down in Newtonians compared with what you'll see on a star map. So you have to learn how to think upside down when you scan the sky with a Newtonian. Some of the name brands that you get Newtonians, and there's a lot of them: Celestron, Apertura, Astrotech, Explore Scientific. I put Apertura twice. Vixen. There's a lot more. Orion and Meade are also in that bucket, but like I mentioned, they closed down about 18 months ago. But you can still find them for sale occasionally on some sites, either new or used. And as mentioned, these are some of the cheapest telescopes, inch for inch. So look, you can get a 4 to 5 inch one for between $100 and $730. Remember, we talked about refractors. A 5 inch refractor would cost upwards of $4,000 to $5,000, right? A 6 inch Newtonian, 220 up to about $1,500. An 8 inch, which is kind of the sweet spot with these, will cost between $630 and say $2,000, somewhere in that area. And again, as we get into these higher ones, the higher range includes bundles, so the mounts. Some of these include a few eyepieces, a finder scope, etc. Even a 12-inch one you can get for about $2,000. If you were to try to get a 12-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain, you're probably in the vicinity of 8,000 to 10,000. And if you're trying to get a 12-inch refractor, you're probably looking at probably 30,000. So it gives you an idea, right? So in terms of the type of car I would call a Newtonian, I'd call them a Honda Civic because the inch for inch, they provide the best value of any design, but they're not too sexy, right? They're a pretty basic telescope that can do a lot. Any questions on Newtonians? Okay, keep going.
Michael has some comments in the chat, but I don't think there's anything that needs feedback, especially.
Okay, I'll keep going. So Dobsonians. So the design is here. You'll notice.
One thing I might point out, I've never used a Newtonian on a gem mount, but wouldn't the eyepiece be kind of going all over the place as you're moving it around in the sky? Like on a SCT, at least you have a right angle.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
you're
know,
right.
diagonal. But with this you wouldn't, so you could be kind of upside down and backwards trying to look at stuff, couldn't you?
Yeah. So what Phil is saying is, okay, this telescope is pointed essentially at Polaris, like 45 degrees up. If this telescope was pointed at something lower, for example, on closer to the ground, potentially this tube would be lower to the ground. The way the mount goes, it's kind of hard for me to show here. I'll have to show it later. There's a design, but basically it goes like almost like a clock. It goes in a like a circle. And so what can happen is this eyepiece can essentially point straight up, or depending on the configuration, point straight down. There's some ways you can mitigate. What I used to do, Phil, is I used to loosen the bolts on my mount, these two
Yeah.
rings, and rotate the tube.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can do. But yes, you're right. Depending on where it's pointing in the sky, if it's on a general electrical mount, you could definitely have issues reaching the eyepiece. A lot of times you're going to need a ladder or a step stool or something to get to it.
For imaging it wouldn't matter, but with an eyepiece it could be pretty weird. I've definitely had weird issues with SCTs, and I could imagine this would be much more convoluted.
Yeah, typically up to about 8 inches, it's not that big a problem. But once you get past that, it
Big
can be
ones.
a bigger
Yep.
problem. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'll keep going here.
All right.
Dobsonians. Essentially the same design as a Newtonian reflector, but you see there's truss tubes, right? This is essentially what I call a Dobsonian telescope. So, what is a Dobsonian? This is one of my favorite stories, by the way, in astronomy. I tell this story all the time. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a Franciscan monk working in a monastery named John Dobson. And John Dobson had been a monk for many years. He was originally a monk in China, then he came to California. He was kind of a hippie, though. He never did his monk duties very well. And all the other monks would get mad at him because he wasn't doing his chants and he wasn't doing the other things that monks are supposed to do. He was kind of a tinkerer, kind of a free spirit. And he had an interest in astronomy. But he looked at all these mount designs. He's like, oh, those German ectoia mounts are so complicated. They're so heavy and bulky. I don't want to deal with that. He looked at fork mounts. Yeah, I don't even like that. So he started messing around. And what he came up with is called the Dobsonian mount. So what that basically is moving it left and right is on a lazy Susan. So literally it slides left and right on a plate down here. And then using Teflon bearings is how you go up and down. That is the essence of the Dobsonian design. The primary mirror sits so you have a base right here called the rocker box, which slides on the lazy Susan. The primary mirror is in this mirror box that has these bearings here for up and down, and then it has a truss tube design. The secondary mirror is up here, just like in a Newtonian, and just like a Newtonian, the eyepiece is up here. So you can you can immediately see the benefits of this, right? Portability, weight. This is the one design that people can make themselves of almost any telescope design. So I like to tell people I can't make anything. I've made two Dobsonian telescopes. So if you're into tinkering or you want to save money and you want to try something, a project, this is a really good project. A lot of my friends made Dobsonian telescope during COVID. It was their COVID project, which I thought was kind of funny. So basically, John Dobson created this design in the early 1960s, I'll say, and it just took off. The Dobsonian telescopes were everywhere. And one of the advantages of this is because they're so cheap and easy to make, they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if you see a big telescope out of the observing field, it's probably a Dobsonian. These days, it's common if you go to a star party to see 16-inch, 20-inch, 30-inch, even 40-inch Dobsonians that are made by average people. So let me just flip through this a little bit. So that is basically the basic design of a Dobsonian telescope is what I just described. The one drawback of the designs is they typically do not have tracking. So this is all manually pushing it across the sky, which for me, as somebody that advises a lot of beginners, I love it because this forces you to learn the sky. So I typically advise people to consider Dobsonians as a first telescope because you can get them cheaper. If you want more aperture, you can get that, and it won't cost you as much as it would with other designs. And it forces you to learn the sky, certain techniques such as star hopping, reading maps, learning the constellations, finding the brightest stars. A lot of people that use reflectors, and in particular Dobsonians, will have to learn these things, and it's a great way to learn about basic astronomy. So the pros of the Dobsonian are that they by far they have the largest bang for the buck of any telescope design. They have gigantic advantages in cost, scalability, weight, portability. These are the full size SUVs of telescopes. Their high portability and easy setup and takedown allow DAWs to be taken anywhere. I've seen a 25-inch Dobsonian packed into a Honda Civic, which, if you saw it, you wouldn't believe it. But it's a huge telescope that required a ladder. I think you're probably at least 10 feet off the ground. But the telescope itself fit into a Civic. These are the true light buckets. These are capable of astounding views of deep sky objects and comets that, because of their aperture, no other design can match. On an per inch basis, these are by far the cheapest types of telescope. And as I mentioned, these are really the only true kind of telescope that amateurs can build on their own. Okay. Now the cons of Newtonians is mirror quality. Like with Newtonians, mirror quality can vary widely, and some DOBs can give decent planetary images, but not great images. So if you're into planets, just be sure you get a mirror that's of decent quality. And most DOBs do not have tracking capabilities. You can get that now. There are some push to Dobsonians we'll talk about later, and also go to Dobsonians that do have tracking, but they're more cost prohibitive. And to be honest, the tracking doesn't always work. Um, Larger DOBs can have narrow fields of view, so it requires frequent repositioning of the telescope to keep the object in view. In recent years, there's systems that have come out, such as ServoCat and Argo Navis, that offer this push-to technology and also go-to technology. And there's also what they call Ponset style tracking platforms that are available that also provide tracking capability. But these can be pretty expensive, a couple $1,000s or so, but they work well for visual use. So typically, if you come to a BSIG observing session, I usually bring my 12-inch Dobsonian, and I have a Ponset style tracking platform that it sits on. So if you want to see one, I can show you mine. And I think there's one or two others in the club that have some. Most Dobsonians that are larger than 12-inch require the use of a ladder to get to the eyepiece when it's pointed higher in the sky. So remember what Phil asked about is it easy to get to the eyepiece if it's pointing in different parts of the sky? It can be difficult. When this gets higher in the sky, this eyepiece becomes like up here, right? As a telescope gets pointing straight up. So you need a ladder to get there. So, any questions on Dobsonians?
Except that it's an alt-azimuth sort of system. So at least the eyepiece is always oriented the same direction. It's just higher or lower.
Yes, exactly. You're right, Phil.
But
yes. So
but on the other mount, it's going to be all wonky because it's rotating around an axis instead of up and down.
Right. Now I'll talk about mounts a little bit more later, but yes.
Yeah.
German Decathlon mounts move kind of, I'll say, like almost in a semicircle pattern. So this eyepiece will also go in a semicircle pattern, whereas this just goes left and right, up and down. So this will go up and down, and so what Phil is saying is the configuration stays the same. It's just altitude changes.
And then Michael has some good comments in the chat just about John Dobson and just kind of his thought process of trying to make a very cheap or free telescope and some ways to make it cheap. So
great.
Just kind of additional comment.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Yep.
So coma, the bane of my existence. So what coma basically is remember we talked about reflecting telescopes having that parabolic mirror, right? So if you look down here, here's the parabolic mirror. What basically happens is light that comes and hits the front of the middle of the mirror comes through a sharp focus, but this curve isn't perfect. And so light that hits the sides of the mirror will come to a slightly different focus. And so what it looks like is if you have an object on the side of the field, you get this like, I'll call it a tail, like a comet's tail, hence the word coma. Coma comes from comet. So basically what will happen is, let's look at these Saturn images. This is as if you had seen Saturn centered in the eyepiece, nice and sharp, right? But if Saturn had drifted to the edge of the field, it looks blurry, right? That's coma. So it's an inherent flaw in parabolic mirrors. The technical definition of this is a variation in magnification over the entrance pupil. If you're into photography, it's the aperture stop. And again, the rays of light striking the edges of the mirror are not reflected precisely at the same angles as light striking closer to the center. So if you think of reflected rays of light as casting circles, the circles on the edges are not reflected to precisely the same point in the focal plane as the rays that are hitting us closer to the center of the mirror are, if that's understandable. So because of that, you get this comet-like appearance, like this picture down here, where this is the star on the edge of the mirror, and you see this tail-like thing. And if you looked at it a wide field look through a parabolic mirror on the sides, this is the way the stars would look. They wouldn't be sharp. You see that? So again, the easiest way to mitigate it is to get something called a paracore. There's other ones out there now, but this is kind of the known one, a Teleview paracore. And that basically is it negates this curve issue with parabolic mirrors. So stars will be sharper. They're not perfectly sharp, but they're sharper at the edge of the field. The other thing you can use is don't use eyepieces that have large apparent fields of view, and we'll talk about that later. Use eyepieces that have shorter focal lengths, which don't actually include the edge of the field, the edge of the mirror in the field. So you're really only using this part of the mirror. Those won't have as much coma either. But anybody that has a Newtonian reflector or a Dobsonian that has a parabolic mirror knows this problem. So Newton did solve the chromatic aberration problem, but he gave us coma. So there's that. So a little bit on collimation. I won't talk too much on this. I don't want to bore anybody, but basically reflecting telescopes have two mirrors, a primary and a secondary. In order to get the best images of the mirrors need to be in perfect alignment with each other. When they're not aligned, the image quality can really suffer, causing your telescope to not perform at 100% optically. Any transporting of the telescope or general jostling can easily knock mirrors out of alignment with each other. So when this happens, you have to go through the process of collimation. Truss tube Dobsonians suffer the most with collimation. I have to collimate my truss Dobsonians every time I set them up. Some Newtonian reflectors, remember I call those their closed tubes, kind of like this one here is a closed tube. They typically need some collimation, but not nearly as much as a truss tube Dobsonian. The tubes are more rigid; they can hold their alignment better. Schmidt-Cassegrains can need collimation, but typically, again, not as much as a truss tube Dobsonian. And again, refractors don't generally need to be collimated, and Macs generally don't need to be collimated. So I won't talk through the process because I don't want to bore you, but basically the idea is when you get done, the secondary mirror is precisely in the middle of the primary, and the primaries looks dead center in the secondary. As you can see, this is the secondary mirror, this outer circle here. You see the primary is this inner circle, how it's dead center. That's the target. And when it's out of alignment, it kind of looks like this. As you go through the process, you get closer and closer, and then you hit dead center. So if you're looking at a star and you take it out of focus, when it's out of collimation, it looks like this, kind of like the center is off center here. And you put it back in focus, you can see it's not very sharp. When you have it perfectly collimated, look, it looks like a perfect donut, and the star is precisely sharp. So that's really what your goal is to get to this point. And there's different tools you can use to do this. A lot of people use laser collimators or what they call collimation caps, which is this. And typically what you're doing is you're messing with the screws on your secondary mirror with a screwdriver, these 3 screws. And then with the main mirror using these main screws to align the primary mirror. So I'll keep going here. So mounts. Before I get into mounts, I'll stop again. Any questions, anything so far?
I think we're good so far.
Great. Thanks. All right. So I'll speak a little bit about mounts. So the most basic kind of mount is called an alt-azimuth mount. And it's essentially the same thing as a Dobsonian mount to a certain degree. But it's the most basic kind. Basically, all you need, the only motion here is an altitude and an azimuth. So this one slides left and right and moves up and down on this bearing. So this is the bearing that makes it go up and down. And there's a little bit of a lazy Susan or some bearing here that makes it go left and right. The advantages here are they're very lightweight, very portable, very intuitive and easy to learn. The downside is most will not track stars. However, you can now get some go-to Altaz mounts. The advantage to an Altaz mount is the cost. These are very cheap, very easy to make. So once you start adding tracking to it, the cost does get a little bit higher. So once you start adding tracking, you might want to consider looking at other mounts as well. Typically, most basic Altaz mounts cannot support anything over 30 to 40 pounds. So typically you see these in the smaller telescopes, the very cheap, almost astronomy killer telescopes. You remember that from the first slide? So these are typically what you'll find on the most basic, say, department store telescopes. It's an Altaz mount. As mentioned, it's very similar to what a Dobsonian mount is, but Dobsonian mounts don't rest on the top of a tripod like these Altaz mounts do. Basic Dobsonian mount uses a lazy Susan that spins on basically left and right, and then two Teflon bearings that provide the altitude motion up and down. The pros again to Dobsonian mounts is that they're very easy to build, they're highly scalable and very lightweight, very portable, rugged, durable. I've used the same Dobsonian mount since 1991 on mine. So these are very rugged, very very easy to use, very transportable, and they tip unless you destroy it, it won't destroy itself. And again, Dobsonian mounts are typically the only kind of mount that a common person can make themselves. And as mentioned, there is tracking available now with either go-to or push-to or Ponset style platforms for Dobsonian mounts. Again, just like with the Altaz mount, most Dobsonian mounts do not have tracking capability, so no photography. And then without tracking, objects need to be recentered more often, particularly in larger Dobsonians. Though the light for the size of the telescope involved, they can be very bulky and take up space. So typically, most people store the Dobsonians with the mirror box resting on the altitude bearings. So basically, they store a Dobsonian as one unit, let's say in the garage or what have you. And then almost all telescopes you see that are larger than 12 inches on, let's say, an observing field are Dobsonians, almost everything. There's another kind of mount called a parallelogram mount. So if you're into binoculars and you'd like to get binoculars for astronomy, these parallelogram mounts came on the market, I'll say 20 years ago now, 15, 20 years ago. And these are excellent for viewing comets or other deep sky objects, also for terrestrial viewing. These are highly portable, easily adjustable, and very flexible. The motions can take a little getting used to, so I won't say they're the most intuitive, but you can eventually figure it out. Then you shouldn't have any problems. And they do have limited maximum weights. The one that I have, I think the maximum is like 10 pounds, so you can't put more than that on it. Typically, these are only used for binocular viewing. They can take the strain off your arms and allow it just to be a more comfortable experience. They also keep objects centered and stable in the field of view. So if you have binoculars, you got to constantly, keep it steady, and this gives you the ability to, relax and just enjoy the view. All right, I'll keep going. So a little bit about tracking mounts. There's two main kinds of tracking mounts, at least for, I'll say for more advanced mounts or for imaging purposes, and those are the German equatorial mount and the fork mount. The German equatorial mount is very complicated. It's very heavy. It's very expensive. And it's also one of the most common types. And so, the discussions with Phil a little bit earlier, the motions are not like the Altaz mount where you go left and right, up and down. See, left and right, up and down. Here you are moving on a bearing that moves almost like a clock. You see how that? So this scope can rotate down to here or over to here, and then left and right is also in a circle, in a clock, basically. So this telescope could spin in 360 degrees if needed, if need be. So why do people deal with these really complicated, heavy beasts of mounts? Well, they're the most stable and they're the least vibrating of all the different mounts. They also have the smoothest movement once you figure out how to set it up. So this enables precise all-night tracking of deep sky objects. Almost all imagers use German equatorial mounts. So if you want to take pictures, you're probably going to end up with a German equatorial mount. Um, the cons of this design is, like I mentioned, they're very difficult to set up and take down. They're painful to transport. You have to learn these right ascension and declination motions, which are not intuitive. Even after 40 years of using them, I still get confused. So you have to properly learn how to balance the telescope on it. You have to learn how to polar align, which is a process in itself. And then once it gets due south, it's hard to visualize this, but say the telescope is pointing due south. So this one's pointed due north. So if it was pointed due south, what would happen is this counterweight bar would be up 90 degrees, and this telescope tube would be down 90 degrees and pointing towards the south. The problem is you'd never want the weight to be above the telescope. So as the telescope is tracking towards the west, this counterweight would keep going up and up and up to the point where it'd be higher off the ground than the telescope. You never want that. So what you have to do is do what's called a meridian flip, which is basically rotating everything 180 degrees so that the telescope now, the tube is to the west. Did I have that right? Yeah, the tube is to the east, and the weight is towards the west. So it's hard to explain. I can show you if you come to a basic presentation more precisely, but those are some of the things you have to learn how to do with the German equatorial mount. So typically these mounts are seen in more expensive refractors or Newtonians, almost all imaging setups these days, and some Schmidt-Cassegrains as well. The fork mount, which is typically only seen these days on Schmidt-Cassegrains, is lighter, it's less complicated, and generally more portable than a German equatorial mount, but even then I don't think they're that portable. The pros is they're very, very quick to set up and take down. You can have this set up in 5 minutes. And up and down, left and right are very intuitive. So this telescope goes up and down, and it goes left and right. That's the motions. So very intuitive, very stable, but not quite as stable as a German equatorial mount. These almost always come with a built-in tracking motor. So it's almost impossible these days to find a fork-mounted telescope without a tracking motor built in. So the cons of this design are they're more portable. I'm sorry. Even though they're more portable, they have less load capacity than German equatorial mounts. So typically, you don't see any fork-mounted designs larger than a C14, which has a 14-inch telescope. So you'll never see anything bigger than that. Because fatter dimensions make it more cumbersome to transport and move around. When it's pointed high in the sky, you need a right angle prism to look through the eyepiece. And Phil kind of alluded to this earlier. If this telescope was pointed straight up, let's say it was pointed straight up, where would the eyepiece be? It'd be down here, right? So if you didn't have this right 90-degree angle prism on it, you would not be able to look through it. So that's what we're talking about here, is putting a 90-degree diagonal on it. And as mentioned, these are almost always seen as either Schmidt-Cassegrains or Max-Uthoffs. There are go-to versions that you can get in this that work in alt-az mode, but many people use equatorial wedges between the base. So equatorial wedge. So basically, you're converting this into a German equatorial mount to give it even better tracking. There's another issue with this design, in that if you're doing imaging over several minutes, you get field curvature. And so what's happening is it's not following the curvature of the Earth. It's just going left and right. So because of that, the object will kind of start to go around the edge of the eyepiece as you're as you're tracking across the sky, and because of that, it causes problems for imaging, because sometimes you take images over hours. And so in that case, that's what I was trying to mention here is you can get a equatorial wedge to mitigate that problem. But if you're going to get an equatorial wedge, you might as well just get a German equatorial mount because that mitigates the need to have another wedge. So any questions about mounts or tracking mounts?
I just commented field rotation instead of field curvature.
Oh, that's a field
yeah.
rotation. Yes, sorry, misspoke. Field rotation, same concept though. As the Earth, as we rotate on our axis, day and night. Let's say the stars would rise in the east and set in the west. They go to a pattern kind of like this, right? Like an arc. Whereas this design just goes left and right, up and down. So it isn't compensating for that arc, unlike the German equatorial mount, which does. That's really the main difference between these two types of mounts. All right, I'll keep going. Go to and push to. So in recent years, there's been some telescope companies that have come out with go to and push to telescopes. So go to, or GPS, utilizes GPS satellites in Earth orbit to automatically move the telescopes directly to any visible object. The steps are basically the GPS system determines the telescope's position on the Earth, and it knows the time and date. The observer then uses the hand controller, the center of the telescope, on one or two stars, basically, which the telescope learns. It learns where they are in the sky. And once it learns that, it can point to any object in the sky. So most of these telescopes that have GPS go-to have 1,000 object databases and 40,000 object databases that it can just go right to the object. You don't have to move the telescope manually at all. Typically, planets, moons, asteroids, certain deep sky objects are all included in these databases. The good part of having a go-to system is it's an awesome way to tour the sky very quickly. You can locate many objects very quickly. You don't have to star hop or use star maps. If you cannot find an object, go-to can bail you out and find the object for you. It can also you can also program. So there's something called right ascension and declination. And every object in the sky has its own, what they call RA and declination. And think of it as like a map of the Earth, but in the sky. So the go-to systems know these coordinates. So you can say, I want to go to Jupiter, and you punch in Jupiter's coordinates. It'll go right to those coordinates, and Jupiter will be right in the center. A lot of these go-to systems have what they call tour mode, which will automatically take you to the best visible objects, given that are in the sky at that time, that day and night. GPS is available for almost every German equatorial mounted telescope now, and fork mounted telescope with a tracking motor in either alt-az or equatorial mode. The cons of this design or go-to is that there's no need to learn the sky or the constellations or even star hopping, some of the basic points of visual astronomy. So to me, observing is more than just finding an object. It's about spending time viewing and understanding what you're seeing. If you just want to find objects, then go-to is a really good way of doing it. But if you want to really learn how to do visual observing, you have to learn how to find the object and then spend the time to view it and understand what you're seeing. There's a learning curve to using a GPS system, which I've seen for some people it can cause frustration. Different manufacturers have different processes for the telescope to learn the sky, as I pointed out at the beginning here. And so some of them are easier than others. I've seen some that are just, why did they do it that way kind of thing? So that could cause some frustration. So GPS requires a telescope with a tracking motor. So most Dobsonians or alt-az mounts do not have GPS. It is accurate enough for astrophotography, but it needs something called what we call guiding to keep the target centered. And typically GPS, if you have a telescope, you can get a basic configuration, and you want to add GPS to it. It typically adds $500 to $1,000 to the cost of the telescope package. Push to is essentially the basic technology is the same as go to, except that the observer physically moves the telescope to the position in the sky. So instead of using GPS, push to uses encoders that are contacting with the altitude bearing up here, if you see on the right, and on the azimuth bearing. So basically, that's how the telescope knows where it's pointed in the sky. It has the same pluses as GPS. You can find things very quickly. Um, you can find many objects very quickly, except it doesn't have a tracking motor. It does work well with Dobsonian mounts. You see some Dobsonians with push-to design, like this one, an Orion 12-inch. The cons is that adding push-to adds a little bit of cost to the telescope, and it never works. It doesn't always work properly. I have this telescope. It's an Orion 12-inch push-to telescope. I've never gotten the push-to to work, which is okay because I know how to point my way around the sky, so it doesn't cause me problems. But if I didn't know how to point my way around the sky, then it would be really frustrating to have push-to that doesn't work. There's also Poinsett-style equatorial tracking platforms. These use a wedge-shaped design that allows anything sitting on it to track the stars. Many of these commercial ones come in either wood or aluminum, and they're typically for visual use, but can handle some rudimentary photography on it, depending on how accurately it's tracking. The pros that it gives large Dobsonian some smooth tracking capacity, allowing for longer, more comfortable viewing at higher power. So you're not always moving the telescope, to keep up with your target in the sky as it's moving towards the west. These will keep it more or less centered for you. However, with these Poinsett style tracking mounts, tracking time is typically 90 minutes or less. Then you need to reset it. So if you're out all night, you might be resetting this 3, 4, 5 times a night. They are somewhat bulky. They can be hard to find, hard to make, expensive, and there is a learning curve to setting them up, polar aligning them, and also maintenance. So I have one that I bought 10 or 11 years ago that it costs a couple $1,000s. So these aren't cheap, but it does do the job on my 16-inch and my 12-inch Dobsonians. It does give them some tracking capacity. So this is another option for you to consider. All right, I'll pause here again. Any questions so far?
Let's see. There were some questions about C-star and whether how does that fit in? And I commented in the comments that it's basically an alt-az, so there's field rotation issues, but it can be mounted on a wedge to eliminate the rotation. I
Yes.
don't know if you want to
Yeah.
address that now or address it later.
No, thanks for the comment too. This is a great one. I deliberately avoided smart telescopes in this talk, though I knew it would come up because there's so many of them out there now. So yeah, so all of what Phil said is correct. If you use it in its normal configuration, you will have field rotation issues as it moves across the sky. Now, people that don't know, these smart telescopes or EAA telescopes, electronic telescopes, have come out in the last couple of years. These are primarily used for taking pictures or imaging, and so they're not visual mounts. They're not visual telescopes, which is why I did not include them here. Uh, but was that a comment, Phil, or was it more of a question?
Well, it was a question, I guess. Let's see. It said, where do scopes like C-star fit in? Um, and I guess that was in relation to mounts, really. And
Yeah.
then, um,
Okay.
and then there was a comment about how about Dwarf 3, and
Yes.
Chuck said yes, it's basically the same as a C star. So I guess all the smart scopes are alt as, but they at least some of them are able to be mounted on a wedge, so they function more as a I don't know.
German electoral.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. So yeah, I didn't want to talk too much about smart telescopes, but uh, so I have a C star, and other ones out there like I think Chuck said. There's dwarfs. There's Veronis. Celestron has the origins. There's a few other ones out there now as well. And what these telescopes do is they do a little bit of everything that I've just talked about. So they'll find the objects for you. They will take the pictures for you. They will do what's called live stacking, which is putting these frames as they're capturing them one on top of the other. And you can see your image coming to life in real time. typically what I do is I'll take the actual subs, those captured images as frames, and I'll take them out of the telescope and I'll do it myself, and create what I think are better images than the live view. But the live view is still pretty good. So they've kind of revolutionized astronomy. But remember, the focus of this talk is visual observing, learning the sky, learning how to move around the sky. And smart telescopes do that all for you. So if you want to take some nice pictures really quickly, and not necessarily learn the sky or learn what you're shooting, then smart telescopes are a good way to start. You can do that. And I think check me if I'm wrong here, but I think you can get them as cheaply as $500 for a sea star. I think a dwarf is also in that same range, so they're not that expensive. And I think over time the technology will get better and better to the point where these EAA images are challenging some of the better astrophotography techniques that we have out there, but they're not quite there yet. Now, on my sea star, to Phil's point, I put a wedge on it, so I basically turned my sea star into instead of sitting on an alt azimuth, it basically sits on a German equatorial mount. So because of that, my sea star tracks the sky much more precisely. I don't have any field curvature, field rotation issues, and those kinds of things. So I can shoot for hours with my sea star. Whereas if I didn't use that wedge, I wouldn't be able to. So I hope that answers the question. Any other comments on that? Okay.
Do
Just
they
to
give
say
raw
that,
images
yeah,
or JPEGs?
to type it in, what kind of is it considered a reflector, a refractor? What kind of scope is
Oh,
considered?
good.
So I know the origin is a more complicated design. It's essentially a RASA, a row Ackermann design. So it's a catadioptric, like a Schmidt-Cassegrain or a Maxidov. Those are kind of wild. Like, these are not a cheap telescope. I think they start around $4,000, but it's taking an 8-inch telescope. So the problem with these EAA telescopes, like the Sea Star or the Dwarf, is typically they're very small. So they have very small aperture, which is great for deep sky objects or Milky Way. I'm sorry, some larger deep sky objects, Milky Way objects, things like that. But to get into the smaller objects, they're not very good. They don't have the resolving power. The Origin is an 8-inch telescope that it's basically they souped up an 8-inch telescope to be an imaging only telescope. And it's very fast. Its focal ratios f2.2, I think. And so you can capture a lot of data really fast on those. I'm trying to think, what is my Sea Star? I think it's a catadioptric. I don't think it's not a reflector, it's a catadioptric design. They're kind of a specialized design. So I'm not going into certain designs that are particularly imaging only, like Ritchie-Curtian telescopes, RASAs. I'm going to stay away from those because it's a visual presentation, but now you're starting to get into some of those designs when you talk about EA telescopes. Any other questions?
Well, you're avoiding it, but if you were going into these, is it raw files or is it JPEG files?
These are FITS files.
FITS files.
Yeah. I'm avoiding the whole imaging side of it. So, but what Phil is alluding to is you can download the frames that you get from these EA telescopes and do your own image processing instead of just letting the telescope do it for you. That's what he's talking about. All right, I'm going to keep going here to keep us on time. So we've talked about telescope designs that visual users use. We talked about mounts. What else do you need? Well, eyepieces are just as important as the telescope for visual purposes. So what are the main aspects of an eyepiece? So you have magnification. So what that is you take the telescope's focal length divided by the eyepiece focal length. So let's say you have a 20 millimeter eyepiece and you have a telescope that has a focal length of 2,000 millimeters. Take 2,000 divided by 20, you get 100 times. That's your magnification. True field of view, which is your eyepiece apparent field divided by the magnification. So your eyepiece will be either stamped or in the literature it'll have the apparent field. Like typically 50 degrees is a pretty common one. So in this example, you take the 100 power you get in this calculation. You take the apparent field of 50 divided by that 100, you get half degree. So your field of view through that telescope and eyepiece will give you a half degree field of view. Eye relief. This is something very important for eyeglass wearers. The distance from the eyepiece to the observer's eye. Eye relief can be a real issue in eyepieces with short focal length. So think of like eyepieces that have higher magnification. Just think of it like this. Instead of saying 2000 divided by 20, let's say 2000 divided by 5. What do you get? You get 400, right? So you get more magnification. So these are the eyepieces that I'm talking about. You have short focal length eyepieces. Eyeglass wearers need to pay special attention to eye relief of an eyepiece. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to get your eye. It's going to bang into your eyeglasses. Weight. Smaller 1.25-inch eyepieces can weigh almost nothing. But the heaviest 2-inch eyepieces can weigh over 2 pounds. And some of these bigger ones we call them hand grenades because they look and feel like a hand grenade. Some telescopes have balance problems because when you use heavier eyepieces, they can push them off balance. So you want to make sure your telescope compensates for that, particularly with Dobsonians. Eyepieces come in 2 standard sizes, 1.25 and 2-inch. Up until about 1975, you can get them in 0.965-inch eyepieces. These are really tiny eyepieces with really tiny apparent fields. But around 1980 or so, the 1.25 eyepieces started to dominate. And then I'll say 5 to 10 years later, 2-inch eyepieces started to come out. So 1.25 eyepieces are smaller, they're lighter, and they typically have narrower field of views than 2-inch versions. 1.25-inch eyepieces are fairly cheap. They can cost between $25 and $200 for decent quality ones. For quality 2-inch eyepieces, they usually start at $80 and go to over $1,000. So why buy a 2-inch versus a 1.25 if they cost so much more? Well, 1.25-inch eyepieces are great for things like planets and, let's say, high to medium power viewing. But 2-inch eyepieces offer very wide fields of view, which are great for viewing bigger deep sky objects, comets, the moon, the sun, even extended objects that are just bigger. Most common 1.25 eyepieces, such as the orthoscopics and plossals, have fairly narrow fields of view. So their apparent fields are between 40 and 52 degrees, which is quite narrow. But more expensive designs, such as the Naglers, even their 1.25 Naglers, can contain, because they contain more complicated optical designs and more glass elements, they have apparent fields reaching as high as 82 degrees with very good edge sharpness. So what I'm saying here is, in some of the more basic designs, such as orthoscopics and plossals, which are far more common in most telescope packages, you can have apparent fields of 40 to 52 degrees. But in 1.25 eyepieces, some of the more expensive ones could go out to 82 degrees. So what the 82 degree ones will give you is a bigger field of view. Now, remember, 1.25 eyepieces kind of cap out at its 82 degrees. 2-inch eyepieces, because of their larger barrel sizes, are capable of apparent fields of up to 110 degrees. These are gigantic fields of view, really huge. Most dedicated deep sky observers will move to 2-inch eyepieces because 2-inch eyepieces can give you a much bigger apparent field of view. They also provide what's called the spacewalk feel. So because the field of view is so big and expansive, you feel like you're almost out in space looking at the object. So you're not your eye isn't necessarily in all the way up to the eyepiece trying to just find the field of view. 2-inch eyepieces, you can back off a little bit and it's almost like a portal into space, like you're in a space capsule looking out into space. So what eyepieces should I consider? So I won't talk too much about this because this is a presentation in itself, but the most common beginner level eyepieces are the orthoscopic, the plossal, the Herschel, the Koenig, and the TeleVue Nagler for a little more advanced level. So orthoscopics are kind of the cheapest design or the most easy design. The designs are here on the right. I won't get into them too much, but these designs basically take a series of convex and concave lenses and stack them together in different configurations to give you their design. So orthoscopics have apparent fields between 40 and 47 degrees. Because these are so narrow fields, and they're typically 1.25 aperture, I'm sorry, inch sizes, they're usually only used on planets, some planetary nebulae, close-ups of the moon and the sun, and that's really it. And you generally don't find orthoscopics in larger focal lengths than 25 millimeter. Plossls are probably the most common eyepieces out there these days. They have roughly 50 or 52 degree apparent fields. They can be used for anything, deep sky, planets, and they have a much bigger focal length range, say from 6 millimeter all the way to 55. Um, so this is the best overall value of all the eyepiece designs. Images are bright. They have high contrast, flat fields, excellent sharpness. So they have some of the same characteristics as orthoscopics. Orthoscopics are really known for having the sharp, corrected fields, very flat fields, very black backgrounds to give you some really high contrast. That's why they're really good for planets. But plossls have some problems internally. They can suffer from internal reflections. When you look at a bright object like say Jupiter or the moon, you get these reflections in them. Their price ranges can go from anywhere from $30 to $150, and typically they'll come in a package with good quality telescopes. These next two aren't as common, but they're common amongst amateurs, the Herschel and the Koenig. The Herschel is primarily used for wide field because it has a bigger apparent field, 65 degrees. And you can get them up to about 32 millimeter focal lengths. These also have flat fields from edge to edge, and they're good for eyeglass wearers because they have long eye relief. But their sharpness and contrast is not as good as you get with orthos and plossls. So a typical one would be like the Meade super wide angle, and then I can't remember is it a Skywatcher QX eyepieces? These are Herschels, and these can cost anywhere from $50 to roughly $250. And then the Koenigs can offer up to 70 degree apparent fields. So now you're getting into the almost a 2-inch eyepiece size, but still in a 1.25 eyepiece. And these also only have two elements, as you see on the right here in this design. So these are usually used for planets in deep sky. They're good for higher magnification. They have really good eye relief, and they can typically cost $150 or less. And then finally, the last type of 1.25, and these go into 2-inch eyepieces as well, are the TeleVue Naglers. These are proprietary designs. I couldn't even find the design online. These are used for planetary and deep sky, but look at the apparent field, 82 degrees, so twice of what you get in an orthoscopic. Huge fields of view, comfortable eye relief, excellent correction, less coma. They correct for coma a little bit, spherical and less spherical aberration. So these are excellent in large, fast reflectors, but these are also heavier and larger than other designs. So take that into consideration if you're in terms of balance issues with your telescopes. There have been 6 types that have come out over the years, over the last, say, 30, 35 years. And look at the costs on these, $300 to $650. I think there's some Naglers you can get that are even more than that now. Compare that with the orthoscopics and the plossls that you can get for, $50. But I will tell you the TeleVue Naglers are in their own class. They're their own category. They're not in the same category as the other 4. They're better eyepieces. So this was, I guess I did find eventually a rudimentary Nagler design online. They don't publish all their designs. So TeleVues, they come in Ethos, Radian, Panoptic, Delos, and Nagler. These are their different models. And these eyepieces tend to start at around $115 for plossls. And the 21 Ethos is just over $1,000. But I will tell you, I use my 21 Ethos probably the most of any of my eyepieces. It's because it's just that good. So again, not to get too much into the eyepiece design, but typically there are 2 different kinds of lenses that go into eyepieces, converging and diverging, or convex and concave. And so convex lenses are thicker at the center. They're kind of like oval shaped. And light comes in, they're refracted downwards, and then you view them here. And then with concave designs, it's kind of the opposite. So light comes in, hits this curved lens, and then goes out. So what eyepieces do is they put them in combinations of each other to get to their designs for providing different positive aspects that we talked about. Excuse me. Any questions about eyepieces? I will tell you that many observers don't get good eyepieces, and the quality, their observing experience is suffers because of that. So I tell people that eyepieces are as important as the telescope for visual observing. It's like, getting a Ferrari and putting 87 octane in there. So you don't as a beginner, you don't necessarily have to get teleview level eyepieces, but consider getting some of these better designs as well.
I'd add a few wear eyeglasses.
Mm-hmm.
Eye relief really matters.
Eye
Um,
relief, yes.
try try some things out at BSIG, or borrow some eyepieces, see what works for you. I I went through a bunch of different stuff just to find things that I liked.
So you like the Deloses, right? Those teleview Deloses?
Uh, I thought they were good. I've kind of settled on the Pentax. You really got me on
Oh,
those, and
the XWs.
yeah, they're awesome. Um, if if you have if you have a reasonable budget and are willing to, buy two or three really good eyepieces, that's where I kind of am at.
Yeah, Phil brings up a good point. At the B6, I generally use what I call one of my Pentax XW eyepieces, and these are competitors of Teleview. And so Teleview eyepieces tend to be, I'll say, $500 and up. The Pentax ones that we're talking about, these XWs, give a lot of that benefit, but they cost about 300 to 350 each. So you save a little bit of money, but you get a lot better performance than some of the more basic designs. So if you come to a BSIG or even a public night, people will have these eyepieces there that you can look through and check them out for yourself. Are there any other questions right now, Phil?
Let's see. Michael says he loves his Pentax eyepieces.
Everybody loves those Pentax eyepieces.
Yeah, they're the bomb. Yeah, they're
So I
great.
I will
I
also
I
advocate for
had
the spotter Hyperions as well. They're also really good.
yeah.
Are you saying, Phil?
Oh, I've had a lot of Teleview eyepieces, and I have a handful left, but honestly, yeah, the Pentax are great.
Okay. Anybody else want to mention eyepieces? Their experiences with eyepieces? Okay,
Hearing
I'll keep
none.
going. I'll keep going. So we've talked about telescopes, mounts, eyepieces. What else do I need as a visual observer? Well, a good finder scope is helpful. Here's a couple of more common ones. There's these. I don't like straight through finder scopes. I just don't like them in general. For one thing, the images are upside down and backwards, and when a telescope's pointed straight up, these things can be hard to look through. So almost all my telescopes have these what they call right angle corrected view finders, and what these are, this is called RASI, right angle corrected view corrected image finder scopes. And what these give you is the right angle view, but also they match the sky and match the maps, match your star maps. So left is wet, left is left, right is right, up is up, and down is down. So these, are, especially for beginners, this is I would definitely recommend investing in a RASI finder. If you want a very wide angle, very easy to use finder, a Telrad is hard to beat. I put some of the companies here in blue where you can find these things if you're interested. And again, I will post this on the BSIG forum page, so you'll have this deck that you can reference. Um, Astronomy maps. I used to use star maps such as the Pocket Sky Atlas, the Radiometria, but now I primarily use Sky Safari, which is a phone app. You can get this either for Apple or Android. Other people use Stellarium, and I don't use these, but I've heard of these Starwalk and Night Sky. Are there any other apps that people use for star maps? Anyone?
No comments yet.
Okay, yeah, Sky Safari is the one I always recommend to people to get. It's actually a
Same.
local company. They're based out of Minnetonka. So if you don't like them, you can just drive over there and yell at them. So star maps again, these are the ones that I see most common. The Pocket Sky Atlas is a great reference. It's small, easily you can easily travel with this. It's waterproof. You can take it out to the field. So I definitely recommend this for a beginner. A right angle prism, we talk about this a little bit, like this guy here. If you have a refractor, a Schmidt-Cassegrain, or a Mac, a right angle prism can provide much more comfortable viewing. And these are some of the companies that make them. There's others. A tracking motor for your telescope, and a hand controller. This can be very important if you're into planetary viewing or photography, or if you just want more time to view objects before you have to recenter them. Color filters are great for planets. I use mine all the time when I look at Jupiter or Saturn or Mars. So you can get color filters like these here in the center. Filters such as deep sky and light pollution reduction filters are really, really good, especially if you live in the city. So deep sky and light pollution reduction filters block out most human-caused light. But when I wrote this 10 years ago, LED lights weren't as common as they are now. There's no defense that we have these days against LED lighting. We can only prevent or mitigate sodium and mercury vapor lights, which is the old technology. But if you've got an LED light in your backyard somewhere, it won't. These filters will not help with those. So keep that in mind. A comfortable observing chair is also a nice accessory to have, especially if it has a solid back support and the right height. It can make things a lot more comfortable. There's something called a Denver chair. I don't know why it's called a Denver chair, but a lot of amateurs have Denver chairs, and you can get them from Starbound Observing Chair. Starbound's the company. In the beginning, I talked about dew removal systems. Several designs, such as refractors, Schmidt-Cassegrains, Maxitoffs, and other designs, they can dew up really quickly on a very heavy moisture night. And so a dew removal system such as a dew heater or a dew gun, which is essentially a DC powered hair dryer. You need a battery for that, obviously. 12-volt DC usually these are. They can be a real lifesaver out in the field. And then if you want to take some pictures, an adapter for taking prime focus pictures, will attach your camera via T-ring to your telescope. Typically, most people that use those with refractors, Schmidt-Casses, Maxitoffs, and some Newtonians. Though with Newtonians, it's a little more difficult because of the angle. And then Barlow lenses. This is an essential piece for beginners as well. Basically, a Barlow lens. Do I not have one on here? Yes, not. Basically multiplies the eyepiece magnification. So a lot of them are 2x. So if you have an eyepiece that gives you 100 power, you throw a 2x Barlow in there, now you have 200 power. So it basically multiplies the number of your eyepieces that you have. So you can get them in ranges from, I think I saw a 0.8 somewhere, all the way up to a 3x. So they come in various magnifications that you can get.
I'd
So
add,
go ahead.
before you get going on the next, um, I'd add, I think the Denver chair is a design from a Denver astronomy club, and it just got distributed widely.
Denver chair.
I've made one. The great thing is that they're adjustable height. That's kind of the critical thing about a observing chair is you want to be able to move up and down because the eyepiece moves up and down. And then there are some comments. Let's see. SkyMap was recommended as a app, I think. And it says, let's see, mention Celestron, StarSense telescopes,
Mm-hmm.
3-inch to 12-inch using a computer and let's see, powerful computer in your pocket,
Mm-hmm.
phone. Let's see, works great with StarSense Plus, right angle viewer.
Yes. So let's try to
StarSense, yeah,
Celestron has something called a star sense, which basically is a GPS device you attach to your telescope. And there's various ones out there, but you can even like control your telescope with your phone.
right.
Remove the mount. You say go to Jupiter, go to the Andromeda Galaxy, and it'll go right to it. So Star Sense gives you that capability, and it does work really well.
Oh, and then Starhopper is a free tool that allows pointing a telescope.
Oh, I've
Haven't
not
heard
heard
of
of
that
that.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
and
right.
there's a link in the chat.
Okay.
Astro Hopper.
Astro Hopper, we'll have to check it out. Anybody else have any comments on any of these accessories or eyepieces? Okay. So I want more information. After all this information that we've covered so far, I still want more information. What can I do? Well, where can you go for more detailed advice on getting the right telescope or the right equipment? You can come to a MAS public viewing night at Eagle Lake Observatory, which is inside of Baylor Regional Park, which is about 40 miles west of Minneapolis near Norwood, Young America. To find one of our club's public star party nights, go to this web address, mnastro.org/events. The first one of the year is scheduled for Saturday, March 14th at 7 p.m. So mark that on your calendars. If you haven't been, it's definitely worth going out there. Eagle Lake Observatory is like a professional observatory. There's no other way to describe it. It's really amazing. The people out there are very knowledgeable. They'll show you lots of objects. They're usually presentations that people will give, and they'll be happy to answer your questions.
Also, Cedar Creek.
Oh yeah, I don't know so much. Hey, Vaults, you still on?
Apparently, I think he's posting that.
Oh, Vaults, why don't you jump in and describe Cedar Creek?
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. Yeah, so Cedar Creek is up in East Bethel. The star parties are posted on the MAS website. So, and complete downloadable star party schedule has just been uploaded to the website a couple days ago. So if you go into the website, into the downloadable documents area, we've got some new PDF files that can be downloaded and printed and handed out with both Eagle Lake free public star parties and Cedar Creek star parties, and I think we just added the BSIG events too.
Oh, cool. So what telescope do you have out at Cedar Creek now, Vaults?
There is a Meade 12-inch.
12-inch McCaskill.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. Hey, Don, are you on here if you want to talk about ELO or Dave Schogren? Anybody want to talk about ELO? Anything I missed? Okay, I'll keep going. The next thing I want to talk about are the BSIG nights. BSIG stands for Beginner Special Interest Group, and I'm the coordinator of that group. We do monthly presentations during the winter like this one on various topics pertaining to beginner astronomy. During the warmer months, starting in April, we'll start heading to Metcalf Field. Metcalf is just north of Afton on the east side of the metro. And the first one of the year is scheduled for Saturday, April 25th at 7 p.m. I always encourage people, if you have a telescope, bring it. Even if it's a terrible telescope, it's been in your closet for 30 years, bring it. We'll show you how to use it. We'll help you learn how to set it up. We'll point you to some objects. We'll show you how to maneuver around the sky. So these BSIG nights are really for people that have an interest about telescopes. Either they have a telescope or they're considering getting a telescope. They want to learn about the sky. It's really driven by the people that are there, which is, I think, is a distinction which the public nights, which are people will show you the sky there through our club telescopes. These BSIG events are our own telescopes. So you'll have, say, 40 to 60 people and say 30 to 40 telescopes set up around the field. So if you'll see all the different kinds of telescopes. You can view different kinds of objects. You can even probably run a telescope if you want, and some people will let you. So that's what we do at these BSIG events. The other thing I want to mention here is the Loanerscope program. Say you're interested in getting a telescope, but you don't really know which one to get. Check out one of our Loanerscopes. We have 19 telescopes in our Loanerscope fleet. When I say check out, it's really like going to the library. You can check out a telescope. So I've listed the ones that I found on the website here. There's only 18, but I think we have 19. So maybe one's out for servicing. But you'll see we have Schmidt-Cassegrains, we have Dobsonians, we have refractors, we have a solar telescope, binoculars. So we have multiples of each kind. Plus we have we have a parallelogram mount for binoculars. We also have many DVDs pertaining to astronomy. So here's the link to that. If you go to mnastro.org, membership scope program. And Anton Gregory is the one that runs the program. So if you want to check out a telescope, you would go onto this link and request the telescope you're interested in, and then Anton would coordinate that with you. And typically these are taken out for about 1 month at a time, but occasionally, depending on the waiting list, you could take it out for longer. So that's basically what the resource our club has. The other thing I could recommend is call an astronomy retail store if you need advice on something. They typically have information on every kind of telescope, accessory. They're usually quite knowledgeable. These are the ones that I use. A lot of the stores have closed over the past few years. Like OpCorp used to be the largest one. They closed a few years ago. Orion, which opened in 1975, they closed about 18 months ago. That's the one I started with. But these are all really good. I would say if you have telescope questions, go to Starizona. They are really good. If you have a telescope that needs fixing, go to Starizona. They're really good, and they're not very expensive either. They're really good people. Um, Agena Astra probably has the largest selection of telescopes and accessories. They don't give advice, so you'd have to like understand what you wanted, but they would have the inventory or can point you to some of that. Woodland Hills is really good as well. That's one I probably use the most. B&H is in New York. They also have a huge warehouse and very knowledgeable people. And then other ones I've used are Astronomics and Adorama. High Point Scientific, people tell me they have the best customer service of any store in the country. So if you have questions, they're also a very good source. They're in New Jersey, and so they're 1 hour ahead of us. So if you call at night, keep that in mind. The rest of these, I think B&H is in New York, Adorama is in New York. Everybody else, Astronomics is in Oklahoma, Starzona is in Arizona, and Agena's in California. So these are the ones that I use the most. Are there any other ones that people would recommend? Okay, I'll
Not
keep going.
heard any. Yeah, that's a good list.
Yeah, Michael Copper says that Gina's the best for odd components. There's also other ones
That's
like
probably true.
Scope Stuff is another one that I've
Yeah,
used
for weird stuff. I
for
like
weird, like
Astronomics
one
just
offs.
because it's kind of family owned and they run cloudy nights and stuff like that.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Oh, good.
So, so, so the in terms of the magazines, astronomy and sky and telescope magazines are the go-to magazines. I've been collecting these since the mid '80s, and I still have my magazines. I don't throw them out. They have really good product reviews, general astronomy topics, etc. So if you're looking for something to start with, I would definitely start with one or both of these. And then for equipment, say you wanted to get equipment, but you don't necessarily want to spend all that money, a good option is to consider used equipment sites. And I used to be very leery about getting used equipment because you don't know what people have done with their equipment. But what I found over the years is that amateur astronomers are incented to keep their equipment in good shape, otherwise they can't use it. So the vast majority of purchases I've made in the last 10 years have been used. And I would say I can only remember one bad transaction I've had. Everything else has been great. All the equipment comes in really good condition, or at least as described condition. So the sites that I use are Cloudy Nights Classifieds. You can find them here. This is also a really good site for general astronomy articles and forums, product reviews, as well as the classifieds. This is run by a company called Anacortes, which is a telescope selling company in I think in Seattle or up in Washington. Astromart is probably the biggest one. This one requires a $16 a year membership. This has astronomy news, equipment auctions, product reviews, as well as the classifieds. There's other ones too. They have them in Canada and England and Australia that I peruse every once in a while. And of course, you can also get equipment on Amazon, eBay, AliExpress, and Craigslist.
And MAS forums and Slack.
Oh, I forgot about MAS Forum. I totally forgot about that. Yes, our own club has a site for members to trade equipment called the Marketplace and Exchange on the MAS forums, and I think there's a Slack channel for that as well.
Slack channel too. Yep. They're
Okay.
usually pretty active. Yeah, this is pretty good.
All right. So with that, oops. Quick summary. Single most important thing a telescope does is it collects light, but not all light is viewed equally. Different designs give you different aspects of the light that you're collecting. Refractors are the best for planetary viewing. They're also the most expensive inch for inch, and you rarely see anything over 5 inches due to cost and difficulty of transport. Schmidt-Cassegrains are the workhorses of telescopes. They're great for beginners. They can do anything, including photography. Highly compact and portable designs. Many have built-in tracking and go-to. They aren't They aren't always the best optically, but they're not bad. So you'll find other designs can be better, but these aren't bad, and they do a little bit of everything. You see more 8-inch aperture Schmidt-Cassegrains than anything else. Maxitovs. These are highly specialized little telescopes. Designs is similar to Schmidt-Cassegrains. They have longer focal lengths, which makes photography and deep sky viewing difficult. But they're amazingly good for planets. So I would say my Maxitovs are as good as my best refractors. I would, I almost would say that I have one or two that are better. It's that close. But if you're a beginner that lives in the city and you can only view planets and the moon, consider a Maxitov. Newtonians, the most common telescope for amateurs, and also a very good first telescope choice. They're typically seen on alt-az or German equatorial mounts. They provide good value since they can be used visually and photography. It's rare to see these straight tube Newtonians on larger than say 12 inches due to the bulky design and the heavy mounts. They're great photography, but typically not great for wide angle viewing because of coma. And Dobsonians are essentially the same thing as a Newtonian, just typically truss design. These are the only telescopes that amateurs can really build on their own. Their high scalability and low cost per inch make it possible to build huge Dobsonians, 20, 30-inch telescopes even. Their main drawbacks are a lack of tracking and the need for a ladder in any telescope over 12 inches of aperture. Like a Newtonian, faster Dobsonians do suffer from coma, but the advantages of the light bucket for deep sky and comet viewing are undeniable. If a user can go without tracking or photography, a Dobsonian is tough to beat in terms of cost, portability, ease of learning, intuitive motions, building your own, and optical capability. And then mounts. German rectangular mounts are very common because of their high stability, low vibration, and precise tracking. These are the top mounts for imaging if you're interested in doing that. They're usually seen with refractors, Newtonians, and some Schmidt-Cassegrains. However, these are bulky, heavy, tough to set up, and their motions are not intuitive, so there's a learning curve. Fork mounts, lighter and more portable than German equatorial mounts. Highly capable fork mounts are typically seen on Schmidt-Cassegrains and Maxitovs. The up and down, left and right motions are very intuitive, making these mounts very easy for beginners to learn. And most of these now even include go-to capability. The Dobsonian mount is by far the easiest and cheapest mount to build, and it's highly scalable. This has enabled amateurs to build medium to, I'll say, monstrous sized telescopes relatively cheaply. Dob mounts are almost always seen with straight tube reflectors up to about 12 inches, or with truss tube telescopes reaching, the biggest ones I've seen are 40 inches. So Titanic, I mean, these are 20 feet off the ground is where the eyepiece is in some of these. Even our club has 25 and 30-inch Dobsonians at Long Lake Conservation Center. And I want to say your feet are 8 or 10 feet off the ground. We're looking through the eyepiece through the 30-inch. These mounts typically do not have tracking, so they cannot typically be used for photography. And because the larger ones have narrow fields of view, they require more frequent repositioning of the telescope to stay on the object. So with that, I'll just say whatever equipment choice you make, be sure to enjoy it and have fun. There's always the need or the desire for people to want something different. Be sure to enjoy what you have, no matter what it is. And with that, are there any questions?
There have been a couple that have popped up. The last one was, where do you find plans to build a Dobsonian? That's a good question. I have no idea.
That is a good question. So when I built mine, I stole mine. So I happened to make friends with the guy that runs Obsession Telescopes, and I got one of his brochures, and I literally scaled. I took a ruler, and I scaled a telescope off of one of his telescopes. There are businesses out there that sell what they call ATM, or amateur telescope maker, um, uh, accessories and equipment. Somebody just posted a link to a 12.5-inch Dobsonian telescope that I think are those instructions. I don't know, is it Costab? I don't know the name. But anyway, there's sites like Scope Stuff is definitely one that to consider if you're going to go that route. But also, any other ATM websites you'd recommend? Or Michael, anybody?
think of it, but I'm sure you can find lots of plans online.
Yeah, and if you're interested in going that route, or whoever asked the question, come see me. I'll point you to the right people to get you started. We have some people that have built them in the club and are very knowledgeable on how to make them.
Lots of people buy mirrors and build stuff around them, right?
Yes, yes. Some people make their own mirrors, but you can definitely
Yeah.
buy your mirrors as well. Hmm.
And then there were some comments up above about cloudy nights and Astromart and Astrobin also as the classified section.
Yeah, I'm reading them
I
now. It
hadn't
looks
thought
like
about that.
they also thumbs up for that. It looks like.
Yep.
Any other questions about telescopes or mounts, or is anybody looking to get a telescope?
Everybody
Michael,
should unmute. I think it's chatting time.
yeah. So Michael Cowper mentions look through several telescopes before you buy a telescope.
Yep.
Go to a star party or the BSIG before you buy a telescope.
Yep.
There are no loaner scopes at Cherry Grove. However, there are a couple telescopes at Cherry Grove that you could use. There's a 10-inch Dobsonian there, and there's also in the observatory there are telescopes you could use at Cherry Grove. There's a 16-inch Schmidt Cassegrain that you can use. There's a 24-inch Dobsonian you can get trained on and use called the BAD, big aperture Dobsonian, and there's also an imaging rig that you can get trained on and use at Cherry Grove. So yes, I guess the question is, are there scopes that you can use at Cherry Grove? Yes.
I'd say if you're telescope curious, BSIG is best because there's always like 1,000 different
Yeah.
ideas and there's something set up and almost anybody would show you what they're doing and be happy to show you around and talk it up or talk it down, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I know what the B6 people that have built their own telescopes will bring them as well. So if you're interested in a Dobsonian, a Newtonian, a Maxitov, a Schmidt-Cassegrain, or a refractor,
Particular size.
even Richard Cretans, Rassas, telescopes that people have built on their own. There's usually at least one, or if not more than that, there at a BSIC event that you can check out and look through them and ask questions. People
And
are very,
eyepieces and
very nice.
accessories and
Yep, all that stuff,
all of it. All of it.
all of it. We'll even show you how to collimate if you want. Somebody asked a question: have the keyholder training classes been established for Cherry Grove? I don't think they have yet. Um, is everybody on here from the CGO committee? Is
I think it has been scheduled.
Has it?
Yeah,
Is, is it on the
check the calendar.
the MAS for the CGO MAS forum? Just perusing the questions here. Astro Hopper, we have to check that out.
Smart scope question at the bottom. Off topic, but not off topic.
March 14th for Cherry Grove.
Okay, would you mind throwing that link in the chat so people can grab it if they're interested?
I actually got it off the MAS website, but I'll look for it.
If you're able to. Sorry to put you on the spot. So Michael mentioned he built a 10-inch Dobsonian 40 years ago. It was sharp but too heavy and clunky. Then he bought a 10-inch Dob from Orion. Uh, yes, I too have an Orion Dob. I'm sorry they're gone too, Michael. Ray asked, should I get a smart telescope? Oh boy, that's another talk. So Ray, if you don't mind unmuting, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to get out of it?
Well, I have my brother, so I have three scopes. And I'm addicted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I put the question out there only because I think smart scopes are having such a huge impact in our field. And my brother has seen some photos that, I'm not that great. I'm still working on, I'm a work in progress. But he's seen some pictures and I recommended that he get a smart scope because he was, really interested in astronomy and he bought one. He bought a Sea Star
Mm-hmm.
S50, and he's been out there banging out photographs much quicker than I could ever. He's fascinated. He's loving it, and so I think what it's doing is it's opening up a space that some folks wouldn't have access to. And I brought it up there just to bring up the discussion, really more than anything. I obviously, you've talked a lot about observing in this talk, and it was a fantastic presentation, but I just think that it seems as though these devices are going to have some really big impact in our hobby.
I think that all of what you said is accurate. So I've been in the hobby 40 years now, so I've seen a lot of things, a lot of changes come to the hobby. When I started and you went to a star party, you see these huge Newtonian straight tube telescopes. My friend had one that weighed 800 pounds. Okay. Those were common back then. They'd come in these pickup trucks. And then all of a sudden, these Dobsonians started showing up as Schmidt-Cassegrains. And then a few years later, somebody brought a laptop to a star party. And we're like, why did you bring a laptop to a star party? Why'd you bring a computer? Oh, I'm an imager. Well, what's that? And then people started getting into imaging, right? So this is like the next evolution of that process, right? So in the 90s, the manufacturing processes got so much better. So it was harder to get a really bad telescope, which was a big change back then. And since then, designs have come and gone. Now we're getting into more people are getting into imaging over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, like I have. And now we're going into the next thing, which is smart scopes. And smart scopes are great if you have an interest in astronomy, but you don't want to learn the basics of visual astronomy. That's a great way to go. So I have a C-Star and I use it quite often. I use it in conjunction with my visual and my other imaging telescopes because the C-Star is so easy to set up and just use. I can have it up and running in 5 or 10 minutes. And, my images that I take with my C-Star, they're not going to match what I can do with my other rigs yet, but I think that technology is getting there. So 10 years from now, I think we'll have a very different conversation about EAA telescopes than we are having now. Now we're like, is it worth, investing in one? I think in 10 years, everyone will want one or have one. It'll get to that point. And again, if you're interested in hardcore visual astronomy, then I would say, which is the base of this talk, then I would say don't get an EAA telescope. But if you just want a telescope that you can take out really quick, take some pictures, to show people, they live stack on their own so you can see your image right away, then yes, definitely consider an EAA telescope, a dwarf or a C-Star or a Veronis. If you're interested in the more expensive ones, the Origin is out there now. So the nice thing about astronomy is that, as I say, it attracts all kinds, right? So you have people that started as visual observers like me. Then you have the computer nerds that like the imaging side of it because you play with computers and software, and they're more interested in that aspect of it. And now the next evolution is the people that get into smart telescopes that want the quick hitter that gives you a pretty decent image for not too much money. Remember, you can get a C-Star for like $550 now, or I think the S30 is even cheaper, and I think the dwarf is also like less than $500. So, Chuck, is that right? I think you have a dwarf, you have a C-Star, you have a straight C-Star. So yes, that's a roundabout way of saying I think the technology is getting to the point where an EA scope is definitely an option to consider if you're not interested in visual observing. Any other questions?
Kind of a different thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, to each their own, right?
Yep.
But if you want to learn about visual, then you need to do the way that I've described in this talk.
Yep.
So Michael Cowper also put
Question
in.
over here.
Sorry, say again.
Hey, this is Kaustubh. So, quick question over here. First of all, amazing talk. My question is more about like I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the 3-year-old is really interested in planets and stars right now, and he has all these absurd questions that a lot of times I have to look up and answer that. If I want to get him more interested in the stars just because of his natural curiosity, what route should I be going? A smart telescope or something like a Celestron? Because I keep getting conflicted at his age. Will something like a smart telescope give him the quick, easy access, or would it be better to get him a regular telescope to be able to start learning the process from start to the end?
Personally, I would not get him a smart telescope because he doesn't know his way around the sky yet, right?
Yep.
You can't image planets with that. You can't do Jupiter or Saturn with that.
Right.
So he'd be looking for objects that he doesn't know. He might know the Andromeda Galaxy. He could shoot that. What I would recommend for somebody is like 6 years old would be a 6 to 8 inch uh, reflector. That would the very lightweight, portable. He can carry it out himself. It'll force him to learn the sky, learn the constellations. They're not that expensive, so if he decides tomorrow that he doesn't care anymore, then you're not really out a whole lot of money. But it'll force him to learn how to star hop, learn how to read star maps. Um, I remember when I first started, just finding objects was like such a big deal. And when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, and you find something, that's a big deal. He won't have that experience if he has a smart telescope because smart telescope can find anything. It's just not going to be the same experience as using a regular telescope.
Start with binoculars and a planisphere.
That's true. You could do that. Where do
Yeah.
you live? Do you live in the city or live in the outlying area? Custub?
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. I live in Prior Lake, so not really
It's
core in the
fairly dark
city.
though. Yeah, fairly
Yeah, it's
dark.
fairly
Yeah.
dark, but I have the casino right next to me, flashing those big
Oh,
Oh
right,
yeah.
lights in the sky.
right,
Which is
right.
why I don't live there. Exactly, that's the reason. Yes, but you do have reasonably dark skies.
Yep.
Volz is right. You can get binoculars, but if you want him to be able to find, say, galaxies or deep sky objects, I would
Or
say
planets.
or planets. A 6 to 8 inch reflector is hard to beat.
Okay.
I remember being thrilled with I started with binoculars, but South Dakota was pretty dark, and for me, I was thrilled when I could see just the Galilean moons with binoculars. That was like, all right, I guess this really does work. And that was just binoculars. Um, but it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, I guess.
Michael Copper also put in the chat that he's hosting Planets in the Park on April 24th at Pershing Field Park, which I think is in the city, right? I don't know where that is. Um, he's going to find a few deep sky objects: the Moon, Jupiter, Pleiades, Alberio. So if you live in the cities, check out Plants in the Park. That Michael
But
Copper.
the advantage of planets in the park is, as you say, that it's in the city. If you're not ready, I mean, MAS has a much better sky and fantastic telescopes. But if you've got a couple of kids and you don't want to drive out there 45 minutes each way, and you just want to go to something that's very close to home, Planets in the Park is very friendly, and we have very nice things to look at. Pershing Field Park is in southwest Minneapolis. It's 1 block south of Southwest High School, right on the border between Minneapolis and Edina. And it's very casual. And I teach people how to use a star wheel, and I do a demonstration of why the moon has phases, which you would think is just for kids, but even the grown-ups really like seeing why the moon has phases. So I think it's pretty good.
Okay. Ray mentioned something I should have told Kostov as well. Kostov, I think you should take advantage of the club's loaner scope program because you can check out these various telescopes we've been talking about without having spent any money and see if your son has a real interest. And so you can take out a 6 inch reflector or a Schmidt-Cassegrain or even a solar telescope from the club and try it out before you buy one.
I just got my membership yesterday, so I'm looking forward to actually seeing you guys and learn more about astronomy and maybe try a few loaners just before I buy.
Excellent. Look forward to seeing you out there. So with that, are there any last questions? Are we done? Okay.
I think we're good.
The next beginner special interest group presentation will be on Saturday, March 28th at 1 p.m. Ahmed Reda will be presenting on Middle Eastern astronomy. So I'll post to the MAS forum about that in a couple of weeks. Again, once this presentation is edited, I will post this also on the MAS forum, so you'll have a copy of this deck. Actually, I'll post the deck separate. This video presentation will be on the MAS YouTube channel. Volks will post it on there within a couple days once it's edited. So again, if anybody has any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. either on the MAS forum or in person. With that, thank you guys for attending. We went almost 2.5 hours. So thanks again. I'll see you guys next month.